Okay, student. So now we have moved toward our next experiment, that is experiment number 10, to design and configure a firewall on our server, right? So if you go on the course page of your network design lab, right? So on experiment number 10, you will find out to design and configure this firewall on this particular server, right? So for that, we will see first of all what are the prerequisites would be required to perform this particular experiment, right? And then we will see what is the problem statement for this particular experiment is concerned, right? So if you see the prerequisite, right? So like other experiment also we have seen, the basic knowledge of the networking will be required for this particular experiment, because if you're going to do all the configuration of the firewall on that particular server, right? So for that, what you mean by the firewall, what are the different terminology with respect to the networking part, that you must know, right? Then the IP address classes, class A to class E, what are the ranges of IP addresses and net mask and all that things you must know. Then the exposure of the Cisco packet tracer tool, obviously that also you must know what are the different components are there and how those particular components will be you are going to use to create the logical topology with respect to the firewall, right? And then firewall basic concepts also you must know, why this particular firewall you are going to use or you are going to configure in terms to provide the security to your network, right? So how it will be beneficial for your network, so that also we will see. Then a web server configuration, so how the server can be configured, web server can be configured, right? That we will also see how these particular HTTP services will be turned on that particular web server in that the logical topology, right? And also the DHCP server configuration, also that are nothing but our experiment number 2 itself, right? So that already we know how to configure the server as a DHCP server in order to provide the IP addresses dynamically, right, or automatically, right? So that also we have known already, right? So this is nothing but the prerequisite for this particular firewall configuration, right? And if you see the problem statement, right, so you must understand why this particular firewall will be needed for your organization or for your network, whatever the network you are trying to building, right? And what are the different advantage for having this firewall on your network infrastructure, right? So that also you must know. Then you also know how this particular server can be configured in terms of your web server, in terms of your DHCP server, right? And how you are going to add different kind of the firewall rules for your inbound and outbound traffic, right? How you are going to manage this with the help of some rules and with the help of some filters, right? So that also you need to do in this particular experiment, right? And also you need to analyze the effect of that particular web server configuration, because after applying your firewall, right, how it respond to your network, right? So that also you need to see in this particular experiment, right? So if you see in this particular topology of configuration of firewall on the server, right? So this a simple topology I have given here. So I uses only a 3 PCs over here, the PC0, PC1 and PC2, which with connected with your switch, right? And from switch also we have one connection with our server, right? So this particular server we need to configure as a firewall, right? This server itself we need to again configure as a DHCP server and our web server as well, right? So we need to apply some rules over here in a firewall, right? And that will be applying to all these number of PCs whatever we have in this particular network, right? So for example, if you see here for the server I am giving the IP address as 20.0.0.1, right? And this particular server also I am going to configure as a DHCP server, right? So it will be automatically assigning the IP addresses to these particular PCs, right? Like PC0, PC1 and PC2, right? So if you see the IP addresses of this particular one, right? So PC0 having 20.0.0.2, PC1 is having 20.0.0.3, and the PC2 is having 20.0.0.4, right? And if you see the rules which I have written over here, right, the firewall, ICMP block and IP is allowing. That means what? So whatever the firewall I am going to configure on this particular server, right, so I am going to add some rules over this particular firewall, right, that is so this particular firewall must block that ICMP, right, and it must be allowing only the IP packets, right. So whatever for example, if you are going to ping from this particular PC0 to this particular firewall, right, then it won't be allowing you to ping this particular firewall server, right. So it will, because it will be blocking your ICMP, right. So from any kind of these particular PCs you are not able to ping this particular server, right. But if you go and open the web browser of this particular PCs, right, and if you fire the IP address of that particular firewall, right, then it will be allowing you, and it will be giving you an access to this particular web server also, right, because we are configuring this particular firewall with this particular DHCP server as a web server as well, right. So it will be allowing IP packets only, right. So through browser you are going to able to access this particular server, but through this particular ping or ICMP you are not getting responded from that particular server, right. So this is how we are going to add some rules into our the firewall, right, and how we are going to maintain the security or apply some security over this particular network, right. So this we will be see how we are going to add all these things in our lab manual as well, right. So just move towards that particular lab manual, right, and then we will see how to perform it, right. So let's do that. Right, so now if you see here, and so in experiment number 10, right, so firewall is nothing but you can call it as it is a software, or it will be sometimes a firmware, right, that will enforces a set of rules, right, about what data packets will be allowed to enter or leave from the network, right. So if you see in your personal computer as well, the firewall will be there, right. So it will be allows you, or it will be monitored, right, whatever the incoming packets and outgoing packets are there, right, whether it will be a malicious one, whether it will be not, right. So whether any kind of the rules you are setting up for allowing or denying any kind of the packets or any kind of the network, right. So for that, this particular firewall is a software or firmware is going to getting installed on your systems, right. So whatever the network devices, right, so we are going to use to filter the traffic, right, or any lower the risk of that particular malicious packet which will be traveling over that particular public internet, right, that can be impact the security of the private network, right. So for that purpose, this particular firewall maybe it can be purchased through or as a standalone software application also for sometimes, right. So there are different types of the firewall if you see, right. So if you listed out some types, so if you see here, the packet filtering firewalls are there, stateful inspection firewall, proxy firewall, then next generation firewall is there, right. So right, so these types of the firewall are already there, right. So this packet filtering firewall which can be functionality of it's examines the packet in isolation, right, and it does not know the packet its contents, right. So it's just examine it in isolation part, right. We can call it as a packet filtering firewall, right. So then the second one is the stateful inspection firewall, right, which examines the network traffic to determine whether the one packet is related to the another packet or not, right, whether it can be matches with some functionality with the other packets or not, right. Then the third one is the proxy firewall, right, which inspects the packets at the application layer of the open system interconnection reference model, that we can call it as OSI layer model, right. So whether that particular proxy firewall, right, if you are used, so it will be inspect at the application layer for that OSI reference model, right. And the last one, that is NGFW, right, so that is next generation firewall, which will be having some multi-layered approach, right. So it can be integrate all the enterprise firewall capabilities with an IPS and application control also, right. So IPS is nothing but the intrusion prevention system, right. So so if you see the most of the firewalls are the only having some IDS kind of the thing, right. But in this next generation firewall, which having multi-layered approach, which having IPS also and the application control too, right. So if you see in this diagram also, right, so whatever the internal private network you have, right, so it will be secure by this particular firewall by checking all this unwanted traffic, and whatever the traffic you wanted to allow, you can allow by setting up some rules over here in this particular firewall, right. So it will be helping to reduce traffic. It will be helping you to select and rejected some of the malicious packets as well, right, from the internet, which we are available publicly, right. So your internal private network will be secure by using this particular firewall, right. And how to add all these rules and all that things in terms of the Cisco packet tracer, right, so that we will see now, right. So I have already explained you this particular topology, right. So all these three systems which are connected to this particular switch via this particular server, right. So this server we have configured as a DHCP server, so DHCP server, so all these PCs will get automatically IP addresses allocation from that particular DHCP server, right. And this server is also I am going to configure as a web server, right, and as well as the firewall. So so by allowing in this particular firewall, I am setting up some rules, right, like the ICMP I need to block and the IP protocol I need to allowing, right. So from PCs you cannot ping to this particular firewall, but you can access it from your web browser, right. So that is the main motto for this particular topology, if you see, right. Then how to do that, right, so that we will see how to add all this inbound and outbound on this particular thing, right. So if you go and just double click on this particular server port part, right, and all the settings will be available with you, right. So just go to the desktop part, right, and just select the firewall, right, and here you need to on that particular firewall service on that particular server, right, and you need to apply here some of the inbound rules over here, right. So here I am adding the two rules, right. For example, if you see action will be performed the deny option for the protocol ICMP, and that means ping you cannot be do on that particular server, right. And allowing action I am going to perform on this particular IP protocol, right, that means it can be available through IP protocol, internet protocol, so you can able to access it from the browser only, right. Then remote IP as 00000 and the remote wildcard. So remote wildcard will be the opposite of your remote IP whatever you have, right. So if you see here the 00000, so here's remote IP, and if you see the wildcard remote IP is nothing but it's reverse, right. So here also if you see the reverse of 0.0.0.0 is the broadcasting address, right. So for both we have at the same remote wildcard mask, right. Then then I need to give IP address to that particular that particular server itself, right. So I am giving the static IP address to this particular server as 20.0.0.1, and I am putting default gateway and DNS server as a 0, right, because we are not having here any router, and we are not going to use that as a router as a gateway here, right. So that's why I'm providing here 0.0.0.0, right. Then again I have this particular, if you go into services, right, so this particular server I need to configure as a DHCP server, right, because I need to allocate some IP addresses to my end devices dynamically, right? And for that you need to just on that particular service, right? And you need to provide some starting IP address, right? So I am just giving the some range of starting IP address, that is 20.0.0.0, right? And the subnet mask is also 255.class A subnet mask, right? And the maximum number of user I am giving here the 512, and I am just save this particular DHCP service. As if you wanted to review, then you can review from this particular pool, server pool, right? So all these settings I have mentioned here, it will be appear here, right? So then I need to again configure this particular server as my web server, right? So I have just go to this particular HTTP, right? And I need to select I need to turn on this particular HTTP service on that particular server, right? So after that, if you see if you go in every PC, right, and every PC you need to fire, if you need to turn on this particular DHCP, right, then and then only it will be allocate automatically the IP address from that particular DHCP server, right? So from PC 0 to all the PC 1, PC 2, you need to do this all these things, right? Then if you trying from that particular PCs to ping that particular firewall or ping that particular server, right, then you will not get it ping, right? Why? Because you are enabling the firewall over there, right? We are enabling some rules over there, right? So you are denying all the ICMP packets, right? So this pinging, that is nothing but the ICMP packets you are going to send to that particular server, right? So it will be denying here, and either the request will timeout or the connection is not successful, right? And if you go with the browser of that particular PC1, and if you are trying to access that IP address of that particular server, then you are going to get the access to this particular Cisco packet tracer over here. That is nothing but the your web server, if you see here, right? So this is nothing but the concepts of your firewall, right? So here I am allowing my we can call it as an IP protocol, right? And I am denying here the ICMP protocol, that means ping, right? So we will move forward to our Cisco packet tracer in order to some hands-on, right? So let's do it. Okay, now if you see in this configuration, right, so what I have explained you in this lab manual of this particular experiment, right? So if you see here in this particular server, right, so we will first of all see this server configuration, right? So whatever we have discussed, so just go to the first of all the IP configuration of this particular server, so right, so I have given here the static IP address to this particular server as 20.0.0.1, right? And we are not going to use any routers here, right? So therefore we are not able to perform any gateway part here. So I am just giving here the default one, that is 0.0.0.0, right? Then we are moved toward the services, right? So whatever the services we need to do, right? So this particular server we must configure as first of all the web server, right? And for that I am enabling this particular HTTP and HTTPS services over this particular the web server in order to use this particular server as a web server, right? Then the DHCP, and for that I have again used this particular interface services on. And if you see the starting IP address of that, right, so 20.0.0.0, I am giving the IP address for this particular DHCP server, right? And if you see the maximum number of users are 5 and 2, and I am going to save this particular settings, and this will appear here for review purpose, right? So I have configured this particular server. Then we will use this particular thing for our we can call it as for the firewall part, right? And for firewall, if you see, I am going to check for my firewall part. 1 second. Yes, so if you go in the desktop, right, so you need to find out here the one firewall, right? So IPv4 firewall you need to do, right? So interface is again the fast Ethernet, right? and the action you need to perform here, right? So for example, if you see in action, from action I need to choose allow or deny, right? I need to choose which protocol you wanted to allow or you wanted to deny from the list, right? And you need to give the remote IP addresses and the remote wildcard masks over here, right? And you just need to save these particular rules or inbound rules, right? So I have added two rules over here, right? The first one is to deny ICMP protocol and the second one is to allow IP protocol, right? And remote wildcard mask is nothing but the opposite of whatever you have given in this particular remote IP addresses, right? So here I have given the 0.0.0.0, so opposite of that is nothing but the broadcasting address, that is 255.255.255.255, right? So both the cases I need to do is I need to on this particular service over here, right? Now if you I am set with all these things, right? So I have configured all the PCs, right? And on the PCs if you check, right, so on the PCs you need to give you need to select a DSCP, right? So I have selected here the DSCP for each and every PC so that it can be get IP address automatically from this particular DSCP server. So if you see here the DSCP request is successful, right? So from that now I need to ping from, for example, this particular PC, right? So I just open that PC, okay, and I'm just use the command prompt over here, right? So what is the IP? 20 dot, so ping space 20.0.0.1. If I'm doing this, right, so it will not get pinged. Why? Because I have added some rules, right, into this particular firewall that I need to block this particular ICMP, right? And I need to enable the IP only, right? So if you see here, if it is not get pinged, right? But now I'm going to go with again for my in PC0. If I'm going for my the web browser part, right, and if I'm going to access that same IP address 20.0.0.1, right, so it get ping, so it will gives you then access, right? Why? Because I am allowing the IP protocol, as internet protocol I am allowing to this particular from this particular firewall, right? So so that only the ICMP will be restricted, right, and IP protocol will be allowed for this particular firewall if you consent, right? So from each and every PC you will getting the same result, right? So if so that's why I have put it here for each and every PC that the firewall is enabled and ICMP is blocked through this particular PC2 and IP is allow, ICMP block, IP allow, ICMP block, IP allow, likewise, right? So if you get it, this ping also you can do, right? So it will be not get ping, it will be failed, right? So likewise you can try with each and everything, it will be pinged, it will be failed, right? But if you ping from PC0 to PC1, it will be get successful, right? Because it will be, there will be no part of your here the server part, right? It will be get pinged, right? So this is all about with respect to your firewall, right? How do what do you mean by the firewall, what are the different types of the firewall, and how to add rules in a firewall, right? How to configure the server as your DHCP server, configure as a server as your web server, and configure your server as your firewall, right? And how to add some rules into that particular firewall, how to block any protocol, how to allow any protocol, right, and how to access it, right? So all these things we have covered in this particular experiment number 10, that is configuration of the firewall on the server, right? So I hope you will understand this demonstration and this particular experiment, right? So thank you for joining.